Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Peter Robinson and this is your Ethereum Engineering Group Meetup. Today, Penelope and myself are going to talk about Web3 game design and implementation based on a game that we've created. Before we dive into the slides, let's introduce ourselves. So Penelope, why don't you go first?
Hi, my name is Penelope. I'm currently a games design student, studying, and I have also recently co-founded a game studio, and so I'm very excited to be here today.
Yeah. So I'm Peter, been involved in product development for an awfully long time, cryptography for 30 years-ish, and blockchain for more than a decade. With that, let's present some slides and talk about Web3 game design. And let's get the right set of things and share. So you can hopefully see these slides. And of course, our view on the world has suddenly shifted over there, but it's all good. Let's just drag that here. And I'm going to open up the chat again so we can see the chat whilst we're talking. The people's all good. All right. So I'm from Immutable, but the words here are my own. Penelope, you're from.
I'm from SAE University College,
Yep.
specifically the Brisbane campus, and all of my words are the accumulative from what I have learned, and hopefully I get it right.
And together with our family, we've created What Game Studios, and the first game we've got is 14Numbers, hence the 14 at the bottom right. So, so this talk is going to talk about the design and implementation of Web3 games with a focus on immutable ZKVM. So we've got a pretty big agenda to go through. So Penelope is going to talk about just games and Web3 games. Then I'm going to dive into Web3 game aspects of, and then talk about other designing considerations and, how do these games try to make money and considerations that you need to be thinking about when you're looking at gaming platforms. And then we'll dive into 14Numbers, which is the game that we created, and talk about how it works and just use it as a case study. So I'm going to hand it over to Penelope.
Okay, so, well, Web3 games are games. Some people get caught up in creating a Web3 game, but they don't exactly remember that they are actually creating a game first and foremost. A good game is something that someone makes someone feel something. However, it can't be described as by one singular piece, which will not make the game fun. You can't describe a game fun because then you've just lost sight of it all. It will become your biggest downfall, and fun is an incredibly basic description, and what fun is will change person to person. Instead, you should think about what makes the game enjoyable and utilize that. What makes your game appealing is the question that you should ask yourself. You cannot have a Web3 game before you have the core mechanics of your Web2 game. If your game is awful, people won't play it. When discussing mechanics, that's how does the game actually run? And it's a long conversation that's too long for now. If you want to make a game, you want to do it so that you can see yourself playing it. Because if you don't make a game that you will play, then it will not go great. And all it takes is an idea. Going back to the very start, you cannot have a Web3 game before you have the core mechanics of your Web2 game. However, the core mechanics of your game may very well be driven by Web3. If it works really well as a Web2 game and your Web3 game stuff just doesn't add to it, then what's the point in making a Web3 game? However, you can like design it behind Web3 games so that you actually make it that you have to have Web3 items within the game. So yeah, and a good game can be a good Web3 game. A bad game will be a bad Web3 game, and a good Web2 game could be a very bad Web3 game. And Web3 does need to make sense within the context of a game. So items that you can get in the game at no cost don't make sense as like NFTs. Instead, you need to think of what will add. And a badly designed Web3 game could detract with the economy. And I'm going to hand it over to my dad.
Thank you. Thank you, Penelope. So yeah, so you can have you've got to have a great game. But a great game, it could come down to how it all integrates. And so it's easy to have you can easily have a good game that just doesn't really work in Web3. So you've really got to think about the whole thing together. So, Web3 games, they're going to allow players to have ownership of tradable assets, the NFTs, and also the ERC20s and the 1155s. And so they can facilitate complex economies and improve multiplayer experience. So you can imagine you're in some shooter game, for instance, and you've got some sort of skin on your, I don't know, your equipment. And other people can see that and they can go, wow, they've got the gold equipment. And so, it's a way of trying to do status. It's also naturally social as far as, you've got these things that are tradable. So you're interacting with people, and it improves the ability to communicate within game. So getting back to its core though, so what are actually Web3 games? And I think drawing back, a Web3 game is a game that uses a blockchain or a chain-like thing that's like a blockchain. And there are various aspects to this. And the first one that we're going to talk about are game assets. And so Web3 games can use blockchains for assets. Sorry, I've got my slides slightly wrong. Yeah, assets, trophies, currencies, and game logic. So looking at game assets, they can be, say, for a variety of things. So the far left one is 14Numbers. And so game assets are used for the background of the screen. The next one across is Guild of Guardians, and each Guardian is an NFT. The next one along is Norma in Meadowland, and you can have different Normas, so essentially different dress styles. And they're the NFTs. And then you've got Hunters on Chain, and the Hunters are the NFT. But then you also have, so within, this is Hunters on Chain, you can see that you have a whole variety of different types of things as well that are NFTs and are useful in the game for various things. And say in Guild of Guardians here, you can see you've got artwork. So that's traditional NFT art. You've got avatars. So each player has an avatar, and it can be a default one, or it can be one of these special ones. You've got the Guardians, which we've talked about, and then you've got pets, and you've got other, and in other, there's a whole group of things. And there's guild crafting, which came along after I stopped playing the game. So I've played the game a fair bit, but I didn't get to guild crafting. So within other assets, though, you've got some interesting styles of NFTs here. So the energy token is something that if you possess, then you are allowed to do more things. So there's some things in the game that you would normally get to do, say, 10 times in a day. And this would let you do, say, 13 times, for instance. The epic idol, you can sacrifice that, and then you will randomly get a guardian. And because it's an epic one, I think you're going to get an epic or legendary with certain drop percentages. So it's sort of like a loot box. The cracked heart is used to upgrade a guardian. So they've got various levels, and you can upgrade it from a certain number of essentially status points to a different number. So they've got more oomph in them based on sacrificing an epic cracked heart and making it more powerful. And so you can see that there are quite a variety of things that you're using in game. It's not just a player or a piece. So with these guardians, so we're seeing images, and then you're hearing NFTs. But at the end of the day, you've got two types of NFT contracts. You've got the 721s and 1155s. And so with 721s, each NFT has a separate ID, so a separate 256-bit number, which is the token ID. And each NFT is different. So in a lot of games, you might though have that you've got, say, 100 or 1,000 of the same character, but they're represented by different ERC 721s. And why that could be useful is maybe you want to be able to upgrade them. So you remember how I was talking about how within Guild of Guardians, you sacrificed a cracked heart and then you could increase the power of one. So the power is represented in the metadata. So hence, given that you've got one metadata per NFT, you need to have separate metadata for each guardian. Hence, you in that case, having a 721 makes a lot of sense. A 1155, you have essentially NFT types. And so each NFT type has a separate 256-bit ID. And so game players can own one or more of each of these NFT types. And so it could be used for some sort of in-game currency, possibly. In 14Numbers, we've used them as the background. So if I own, token number 100 and say Penelope owns token 100, they are completely identical. There's no way that, say, the metadata will ever change or anything like that. So in the contracts, you've only got ID numbers and which address owns that ID. The metadata is where you have all of the information related to it. So this is how you link the image that you're seeing. And so for 721s, it's each token, and for 1155s, it's each token type. And so those metadata files are in JSON format. And so, for instance, they'll have a name, they'll have an image, they'll have a token ID, and they'll have attributes. So, and there are a few other basic types that you can have as well. Like I think you can have a video link and such like. But the attributes are completely up to the game itself. And so, for instance, in the 14Numbers, we've got series. So we've got Gen 1, Gen 2, maybe at some point we'll have Gen 3. We've got different rarity levels. We state what the max supply is. So obviously this is something that is completely up to the owner of the contract. So we could theoretically mint as many of a token as we liked, but we, for digital scarcity reasons, are limiting the supply we mint. And because it's important to our game, there's also the artist involved. And so how the metadata files are linked to the contracts is a function in the contract. So in 721s, there's a token URI, and in 1155s, it's just URI. And for 1155s, they can actually just return a constant string. And then users of that string, then of the contract, can then work out what the actual link to the specific token will be. And so, for instance, for token 314,592, it's this here. So this is the hexadecimal out to 32 or 256 bits of the token ID. Okay, so with game assets, they could be representing ownership. So which player can use, say, which guardian, which character in game, or which and game player has a power token, for instance, and that's represented by an NFT. You could also, and to do with it, you can also have minting, so issuance. So you give ownership, but in certain situations. So you could have a free mint where anyone can just mint an NFT. You might mint based on after 30 days of gameplay. You might have another way where you can claim an asset. You might mint as people do something in game, or you might mint and then transfer. So different ways of doing things. Another thing you can do with the assets is burn the assets. So maybe something happens in game and that asset gets destroyed. So the thing with this is that, as we all know, blockchains are permanent. And so if by mistake you burn someone's asset by mistake due to a bug in your code, in your game, then that's going to be a really messy situation to try and sort out. Um, Another thing that can happen is that you can update the metadata. And so, this is like I was saying about the capabilities of the asset changing. So the Guardian gaining more capability. So crafting is the idea that you can combine multiple assets together to gain another asset. And so in Guild of Guardians, again, using that as an example, you can have multiple rare and epic guardians. You combine them together and you get a cracked heart. And then that cracked heart can then be used to build up and like increase the capability of one of the guardians. So it's a whole economy there of getting these some guardians working together to create a cracked heart, and then using that to improve another guardian. So with game assets, there are some gotchas that you need to be careful of that might not exist so much in Web2 games. And probably one of the most complicated ones is asset sync. So if I've got an NFT, so I've got a really particularly good guardian, and I sell that guardian, when should I stop having the use of it in game? And or if I transfer it again, when should I stop having usage? And if I buy it or I acquire it, when can I start using it? So could it be, so in GOG, they were saying that, someone would have a really expensive guardian, and which would be really powerful and let them do great things. And they do a run of the game, and then they transfer it to another player who would then do a run of the game. And so, they ended up introducing a 24-hour cooling off period. So essentially you acquire a guardian and then you have to wait 24 hours before you can use it. So yeah, it's a complicated one and something to think about. How does it fit into your gameplay, and could people use it to try and, like play with the system and advance better? Yeah, yes, Guardian Flash Loan, maybe. Another really big thing to ponder with the whole Web3 is, and this applies to an extent to Web2 as well, is can someone who's brand new to the game spend $100 or $1,000 and suddenly, they can wipe out people who've been playing the game for a year? So you've got free to pay people, or free to play, should I say, and they haven't paid for anything. But maybe they know other people who, they say, this is a great game, you should play it. And then that other person plays it and they spend $20 or $100 or $1,000. And so, like you're cultivating your free to play people is important because they might know a whole heap of other people. They might become an influencer for the game, talking about how awesome the game is. So you don't want to make them feel disenfranchised. So there's got to be ways of in designing the game so that maybe you have some paid people, who've got really good capability end up in one cohort playing or one leaderboard, and there's a different leaderboard essentially for people who don't have as good guardians because they haven't paid. So you've got to still make everyone still feel part of the whole journey and part of the game and not feel disenfranchised. Another gotcha with assets is you've got to think about game life cycle. So, I've said, along the bottom axis here, I've said it's in days or maybe weeks, but for some games, it could even be in hours. Hopefully not. Hopefully it's at least days because, each game takes an awful lot of effort to create. And so the idea is, though, that, games often go through this peak curve where no one's playing it, you launch it, and then suddenly there are a lot of people playing it. Suddenly, lots and lots of people playing it. And then after some time, days, weeks, months, the number of people playing it drops off. And eventually you hopefully get to some, time where you've got people continuing to play it for like in a year or two. But, that is going to be not as good as the peak. And sometimes you can work on having a double hump or a triple hump by doing, say, new launches of a, version 2 or some expansion pack or something. And that might cause you a double hump. But as far as game assets are concerned, though, so assume that, everyone ends up having an NFT in the game. And so that means that, at the peak, everyone's got an NFT doing something with that NFT and your game. But then when you suddenly have, say, a fifth of the people playing the game, you can have a glut of NFTs. Sure, some people will earn them and keep them and not do anything with them, but there'll be a whole heap of other people who will try and sell them. So if everyone tries to sell them all at once, then the price of them is just going to crash. And people will feel burnt because they'll have spent some money and suddenly the thing they spent money on is worth nothing. And so people will get grumpy. So what you've got to do then is have a way of people essentially using up the excess NFTs. And so, you need to have some way to combine them. So in Guild of Guardians, you had that thing where you'd have multiple rares and epics and you'd combine them together and then you create this cracked heart. And so you're essentially burning NFTs, burning excess NFTs to create this new thing, which is then used to boost another character. And so it works on reducing supply. So that's one mechanism, but you need to consider having something like this in the game. Otherwise, you're likely to end up having at least some of your collection being worthless, and then some people being disenfranchised because they'll feel that they've been ripped off or something. Another thing to think about is, do you ever need more than one NFT? So for hunters on chain, you have these hunters. And the thing is that, there were a range of other assets you could have, but really the hunters are the thing. And you only ever really need one hunter. So if you buy a better hunter for then what you're going to do is you're going to probably get rid of or sell your weaker hunter because you don't need it anymore. There's never really seems to be a reason. So I've played Hunters on Chain like for a few months, about a year ago, and so the game may have progressed since then, but at least at that point, that was how it appeared. And so in Guild of Guardians, you you end up having, say, 20 or 30 guardians, but generally have the core five, strongest five you have really are sort of all you need. And there are some circumstances that they've tried to work into the game where in this situation, when you're in this area, you need another guardian, but it's very on the periphery of the game, really. And generally, if you say had the set of 5 that are on screen right now, you'd be good to go in 99% of situations. Um, and so I think when you're designing a game, trying to have so these two people here are playing paper scissors rock, and if you think of paper scissors rock, the best thing to have is situational. It's really going to depend on what the other opponent comes up with, and so if you can have a way in your game that maybe in this scenario it's good to have this one, and in this scenario it's good to have that one, or in that way you end up wanting to own a variety of NFTs, a variety of, I don't know, guardians or whatever, to allow for the various situations that you might be in. Another gotcha that I see a bit is capability inflation. So you go from Gen 1 to Gen 2 to Gen 3, where Gen 1's just this normal thing, Gen 2's got a few more things on it, and Gen 3's got yet more. And because, you do your Gen 1 sets of NFTs related to your game, and then you think, oh, look, we really need to sell Gen 2. And so how you sell Gen 2 is you make it more capable, and then you end up making Gen 3 even more capable. And I think to an extent you burn people who've invested in, say, Gen 1, because then they go, oh, now I need to buy Gen 2, and maybe that disenfranchises people a little bit. And I was talking with James Finlayson, well, we were talking with James Finlayson yesterday, and he actually said, no, you need to break it down into power inflation and attribute inflation. So power inflation would be where the character, say, has 100% in Gen 1, and they have 110, 100, and then in Gen 2, 125 in Gen 3. And people can really see, straight out, oh, look, it's just that's got a boost. And so, it's really blatant that we're saying you need to buy the new Guardians, otherwise you're just not going to be competitive. Whereas attribute inflation, maybe there's some new capability that's completely separate that allows you to operate better in this circumstance. So it's not not meaning that every Gen 2 is going to be better than every Gen 1. It's a way of doing a similar thing but different. Are there any questions before I go any further? Okay, perfectly clear. Brilliant. Another use of NFTs is badges, or trophies, awards, and these are essentially soul bound. So you give someone something saying, you were part of the first cohort to play the game. It's a non-tradable asset. It, I think for some game players this has utility, but generally it has limited utility, I think. But I have seen talk of it used as a way of giving something to the game player that then later on they can sacrifice. So it's essentially a way of saying, showing that they did something at some point that later on they can do something with, but you don't want them to be allowed to, say, sell it. So for instance, you say people who've played the game in the first 6 months, they get this NFT, this soulbound trophy badge thing, and then in a year's time, they'll be able to sacrifice it and do something. So currencies. So game currencies can be represented as ERC20 tokens, but like, when should you do that is a really hard question. And So if you want the token to be tradable, that's a great idea. And it would need to be an ERC20. But if the token's going to have really rapid balance changes, then maybe you don't want it to be an ERC20, because if it's going to change, say, once every, say, minute, then that's going to be an awful lot of blockchain transactions when you end up having lots and lots of players. So maybe you'd want to have a primary currency that's an ERC20 and a secondary one that's actively used in game. So maybe you have gold or something that goes up and down, and with that gold, you can buy diamonds. And so that would mean maybe your primary currency, that's the ERC20, maybe at most you might have one transaction a day from a game player, whereas maybe there are hundreds of currency changes for the secondary currency, or balance changes, should I say. Another one way that of approaching this sort of scene is that you force people to accrue currency in game, and you only allow them to convert to ERC20 once they've got a certain amount, or maybe after a certain amount of time, or maybe they've got to play the game 5 times and then they can convert to the ERC20. So it's all about trying to limit how many transactions are going to have to hit the blockchain, because at the end of the day, if you're going to do lots and lots of transactions, then you're going to end up having to pay for it one way or another. So again, with the game currencies, you've got to look to the pay to win thing is a problem. Another issue is if you've got to have utility, and this is the same with any coin, meme coin, or altcoin, that if you create a currency, people have got to be able to use it for something. And if you end up, say, giving it to game players as, each week we're going to hand out, I don't know, 20,000 game coins. If there's nothing for the people to do, what they're going to do is they're going to go to a DEX, swap it, and then, for fiat currency, essentially, or, hard currency like ETH or IMX or something. And so if everyone's dumping your currency because there's no utility, it means that the price is always going to have a downward pressure. So, you don't want to be in that situation. Another thing that you can do would be to have the game logic on chain. So, you can put a lot of logic on chain, or a little bit of logic on chain, or no logic on chain. And so having logic on chain, it's very transparent what's happening. Everyone can understand how the game works. And if there's some reward structure, it's really open as to what's going on. And so, like it's sort of, I don't know, open misere, as it will. All your cards are on the table. But there are some issues with this. So if you've got a lot of logic on chain, then that is going to result in a lot of transactions potentially. And if your game becomes popular, will the blockchain be able to keep up? If you have to end up paying for those transactions, how are you going to pay for them? Are they going to be economic? Like, is each transaction going to have enough economic value to warrant that transaction? Another aspect is attackers. So if you've got all your code on chain, or even some code on chain, then attackers are going to be able to look at it and find bugs in the code potentially and exploit it. So you need to be really careful about looking at, if there are bugs in the code on chain. The other thing is that you might want to, games evolve quite rapidly, and changing, say, the game logic in your app, say on on the iPhone or Android, is much easier than upgrading a contract on chain. And so that's got to be another factor to consider. Another one, of course, is that if your game logic is complex, then it's going to be super complex encoding that into a contract. And so, you want to be pretty careful about that as well. And then finally, it's about the off-chain and on-chain state need to be kept in sync, and trying to think about how that's really going to work is can be quite complicated because, you know, so I think the great example of this is around, there was a first person shooter and someone worked out that the number of bullets you were using wasn't being kept in sync. So they hacked the game client and had infinite bullets and were able to do 1,000 bullets a second. And so they then ended up just spraying bullets everywhere and, you know, winning when, and that meant that, you know, the on-chain state wasn't keeping up with the off-chain state and they weren't being kept in sync. So that was a problem. And maybe that could have been done with a server and the client, but it certainly makes things complicated. So there are other considerations as well. Probably one of the big ones is when to sign in, which, you know, like sounds, you know, like if you're coming from a like a enterprise app, you know, of course everyone signs in, but you know, if you're playing a game, do you really want to sign in? And some people will be happy to sign in. I think people have got quite used to signing in for, say, sign in with Google, sign in with Facebook. But other people, maybe they don't want to sign in until they've played the game a bit. So what you could do is you can say, maybe you do a sign in when you need to do to do something that needs you to sign in, and that's an approach. So you've got generally more control if you force everyone to sign in, and certainly a lot of games that's what they do. There is only one button. You either click that sign in, or you might as well uninstall the app. So it's a choice point. Um, so another thing to consider is how playable is the game for free-to-play players? And so this is typically going to be most people when they first play the game. They're not going to have any assets in game. And so, you know, if the game is a bit naff, if you don't have any NFTs, then that's going to be the initial experience that everyone's going to have. So you've really got to be thinking about how to have a good game that becomes better with NFTs. Longevity is a really important thing. And so, you know, some people will only want to buy NFTs if they're sure that the game's going to be around for a while. And you know, so you know, some people will buy them no matter what, but some people, they really want to experience the game, and then they look at it and they think, can I see myself playing this in a year's time? Or do I think other people will? Is there going to be resale value in these NFTs? And it's a funny thing that you know, I'm saying this because there are a lot of Web2 games, all the Web2 games, you buy something in game and there's no way you're ever going to sell it to anyone. So suddenly you've got the option to sell it, and then people think about the resale value. But I think that's a psychological thing that some people do. Another consideration is radical transparency. So there's a website called DappRadar, and DappRadar essentially counts the transactions that are hitting a contract. And so historically, it was for things like DEXs and some sort of DeFi application. And so you'd list the contracts. But you can also do it for games. And so you list out all the contracts that are related to your game, and then every transaction that hits your contract counts towards how many people are playing your game. So on the right-hand side, you've got transactions, and the left-hand side is the UAW, which I think is active wallets. You know, yeah, I think it's user active wallets or something. And so, you know, really off to the left-hand side is how many people are actually playing your game. And so because this is public, it's good because then when you're trying to fundraise, you can say, you know, like what 35,000 people each day are playing my game. And then, you know, the people you're fundraising with say, oh, are you sure? You know, are you telling the truth? And you can say, look at DappRadar. It's, you know, there it is right in front of you. And the thing to think about, though, with these numbers is that they can be gamed to an extent. So you can, like I could create, say, 1,000 wallets and I could pay for transactions to be submitted, or I could create 1,000 passport wallets, much harder, but I could do it. And I could be submitting transactions each day. Wouldn't actually help the game, but it would help manufacture these numbers a bit. Yet another thing is the Apple and Google app stores. So Google Play and Apple App Store. So they've got some complex Web3 policies. And the thing is, the policies weren't necessarily written for Web3. And so, it's a bit complicated when you first walk through it. Giving advice on it is complicated because the questions that get asked change quite regularly as laws, are enacted around the world, and things come and go. So the thing to think about is, though, that you've got to be really careful to be adhering to what the policy is, because otherwise, you might get taken off the store. So which would be, massive for a game. So it's something that you've got to keep in mind is working out exactly what you want to do and then trying to understand the policies of Apple and Google. And they're not the same either. They have different policies and which result in different things in different parts of the world. Are there any questions at this point? If trading of the game cryptocurrency is not desired, wouldn't the freeze and wipe function work as in USDC? Ooh, I am not. I'm not across the freeze and wipe function. If you can explain it, then I can maybe answer it. Or we can take it offline and we can talk about it later. Okay, all right, we'll talk about it later. Yeah, all right, let's do that. Okay, how do Web3 games make money? So this is not a definitive guide. This is my own observations. So Web3 games can use good old Web2 game methods to make money, as well as normal Web3 stuff. So they can have in-app purchases of things, but they can also do sell NFTs and ERC20s in-app, or they can also have primary sales outside of the app. You can also have royalties on secondary sales of NFTs. And you could also sell the ERC20 token as well. Okay, what is the benefit of a Web3 game to have its own utility token instead of a stablecoin or other major cryptocurrency such as BNB, and if that's required or not? Okay, so this is an interesting one. So some games, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the reason why you would probably have an ERC20 is that you've created a token out of nothing. So me or our game studio, What Game Studios, creates a token, and say if we sell $1 million worth of that token somehow, then we've made $1 million, which is so if we used, say, USDC or ETH, then we wouldn't be making that money because we wouldn't be able to sell it. We'd have to buy it to sell it. So hence we're better off using a currency that we've created rather than a currency that already exists. Does that answer your question? Okay, so that answers the question. So the mainstream gaming community seems deeply skeptical of Web3 gaming, mainly I think because of pay to win and earlier scams. Agree? Is that changing? I'd say that it's changing. I think so. Leaning on my immutable knowledge here, I think a lot of major studios and a lot of minor studios are really passionate about Web3 and see that that is a great opportunity and something for the future. So I think that the pay to win is an issue in Web 2 as well as Web 3, but so that's something that does happen.
It's also to do with we aren't taught it currently, and so it's a very new technology, even though it's been around for a while. When uh, people are getting taught about it, then it's going to become more mainstream
Mm.
because people know about it. However, it is still worth knowing about.
Oh, most certainly. I think so. I think all of the major game studios are getting into it.
Yeah.
All right, look, I'm going to keep on with the talk and we'll answer the other questions more towards the end. Okay, so imagine yourself, you've got a game that you've downloaded, you realize it's a Web3 game, you go to Token Trove. How much money are you going to be prepared to spend on an NFT in this new game to you? $1,000, 1 cent, 0.1 cent? And and the thing is, how much is that NFT worth? Is it worth the game selling an NFT to you for 1 cent even? So it's a really complicated one. And really, what it shows is that it comes down to marketing. So, the perception of value comes down to um, people's perception of, does it have utility? So, if we think of Beanie Babies, they're these little fluffy things, but then some people ascribed $100,000, this little fluffy thing's worth. And so it's similarly, if you have a big marketing effort, then it will help people know about your game, and then people will ascribe value to the NFTs in it, so they're more likely to buy those NFTs to play the game. Otherwise, you're relying on people playing the game and then deciding, hey, my enjoyment of the game would be made better if I owned these other things. So, really what you want to be doing is building a community which then drives you having passionate game players, and then you try and sell them something. So trying to sell them something before you've got the community and the passionate game players is going to be a hard sell. It's not impossible, but it certainly is going to be hard. And people need to be, like passionate. Like if you're a large game studio that everyone's heard of, people are far more likely to say, oh, look, I trust that they're going to produce a good game. I trust that the game's not is going to be around for in years to come. So I'm happy to get involved. But if it's a smaller thing, building the community is going to be what's required. Okay, so what about blockchain infrastructure considerations? So when you're looking at a platform, what should you be thinking about? And so I'd say probably one of the first things to be looking at is Ethereum virtual machine, EVM, is probably the thing you want to be looking at. I think there are other VMs out there, but going off to some other VM means you're not going to be tapping into people who know about Solidity, smart contract development. The best tools are for out there for EVM, and you probably want your contracts audited, and auditors know Solidity, know EVM, or all of them do. Whereas if you're off in other places, then it might be much harder for you. Another thing to consider is finality. So when you have a blockchain transaction, it's final once the block that it's included in is final. And that means that it can never change. And so if you're designing a game, having to design where, well, maybe this thing that I've locked in changes and isn't locked in anymore, makes, that makes life really complicated. So it's better to have, like single block finality and fast finality. You don't want to be having someone to wait 10 minutes to open a loot box whilst the transaction's becoming final. So, you need it to be pretty snappy. So a good blockchain has single slot finality. So as soon as a transaction's in a block, it's done. And hopefully you've got something like 2-second block time. Another thing that you want to have is, if at all possible, free transactions or sponsored transactions. So you don't want to have your game players have to own ETH or IMX before they can play your game, because that's put a massive bar in the way. So even, so what you really want to do is you want to have it that the game player doesn't even know they're using a blockchain necessarily when they're first using the game. And so they need to be able to not have to pay for gas. And so maybe it is, so a platform would be good if it gave you free transactions, or maybe it says, look, once you're above this threshold, we're going to get you to pay. But if you're just in a small indie game that's just starting out, don't worry, you get yourself going, and then we'll get you to pay. So that's what you really want to be looking at is, is there a way for that to happen, and can you sponsor the gas for your game players if you become big? Another part is the crypto wallet. So, with MetaMask, every time you do a transaction, you have a pop-up. So if you're in gameplay, having some cryptocurrency pop up will completely break the game, like loop, the working in the game. Here you are, you're in the game, and suddenly you've got this thing popping up. Be horrible. So you don't want to have in-game pop-ups. And preferably you want social login as well. You don't want people having to have some sort of cryptocurrency thing where they've got to remember some big long password. So being able to just log in with Google or log in with Facebook or log in with Apple is far better. And the wallet needs to be NFT friendly. So it needs to show the people what their assets are. And ideally, this is their game home. So they have all of their assets there and they have their money there. So they play your game and they play some other game. Maybe they sell some of the assets from some other game or your game and they play yet another game. And so the idea is that they're cycling all their assets, and essentially the hub of it all is the wallet. And so it's the home. A good game platform needs to enforce royalties. It needs to make sure that no one's operating a marketplace that bypasses your royalties, because royalties are going to be a big part of how you make money. Another thing you've got to watch out for is the SDN list. So essentially, you don't want to be being a money laundering place for people from North Korea or, drug people or whatever. So somehow or other, you've got to respect the SDN list that's put out by the US Treasury Department. And so a good blockchain will help you do that and mean that you don't have to worry about it. They'll just say, look, it's all good. We've sorted it out for you. Ideally, you'll have example contracts and presets that have already been audited, so you don't have to worry about auditing contracts. And hopefully there's got lots of tools and on-ramps and things so that you've got a whole ecosystem of tools to use the blockchain. And probably one of the most important things is a good platform has to have a lot of players. More players means more people who could play your game. And those players need to have lots of games to play. So a good platform is going to have a lot of games too. And a good platform also has a lot of money on it. So if you really want to have a platform where there's lots of money, so people can have got money to spend on your game, and there's not friction of say moving money into it, or you've got lots of ways of moving money in that's low friction, I guess is what I'm saying. Yeah. Okay, so before I hit the case study, I'll go through some more questions. Um, so if you own a currency, you require a listing and liquidity to support ongoing value of your own gain token, which could be a problem. What do I think about this? So if you're trying to get on a centralized exchange, it's going to cost you money for sure. If you're going to be on a decentralized exchange, then you need to have some liquidity. You can design your liquidity pool though, so you have just a little bit of, say, USDC or IMX and a lot of the game token. About a year or two ago now, look in the YouTube channel, I did a talk on DEXs, and I talk about how to set up a DEX pool where you're only offering a little bit of or no currency. So essentially you might only have game token and no or little other token. And that can be still a way of people trading the coin. And then Mark said, any thought on EIP 191712, signed messages as a way of working around the gas issue? Yes, you can do that. And in fact, it's actually quite widely used as a way of people submitting signed data as a way of not having to pay for gas. So that is something that's used. Yeah, it is a mechanism. All right, 14 numbers. So as I said, Penelope and I, with help from Elizabeth and Kathy, have been working on 14 numbers for about 6 months. And so 14 numbers is a puzzle game. And so everyone in the world is trying to solve the same puzzle each day. You have 14 numbers, so 1 to 10, 25, 50, 75, and 100. And you've got to try and solve 3 equations for a daily target number. So for instance, on day 170, the target was 303, 175 was 430. And so day 1 was the 1st of December, 2024. And so the target numbers go between 250 and 1,000. And so some days it's easy, some days are a bit harder. I can say that some people are really super passionate about the game. They really love the game. And some people hate the game. They say it's too hard. And they essentially say there should be easy modes, or, there should be ways of getting help. And the other people, though, who love the game, they say, no, it's not possible. You cannot let anyone we cannot have an easy mode. That's just not possible. So it's really interesting just seeing how people react to the game. So because everyone's got the same target number each day, you've got this shared experience thing happening. And it's a really interesting thing where you can talk to other people about, how you went, and, they can chat to you about it. So it's a bit of a social thing as well. There are free scenes. So the scenes at the top, the coffee, the Swedish dogs, and the fish, the koi, they're free. And then you can have a range of NFTs that you can own, and they're ERC1155s. And to create digital scarcity, there's a max supply of the different types of NFTs. And so each day or each 30 days of gameplay, you get to claim an NFT. And when you claim it, it's randomly selected And I'm going to do a talk in about a month's time, or rather in 2 weeks' time, that talk about the claim contract. A requirement for publishing on iOS is that if you've got a loot box, which this is sort of a loot box, maybe it isn't, because people don't have to pay anything to use it. Because of that, you have to publish the drop probabilities. The scenes can be also bought on Token Trove, and given we're giving them away, we decided we charge 10%. And so, earlier I said, well, do you need to own more than one NFT? And the answer to that is you could just play with the free scenes, but some people like to switch scenes every few days. And people like, say, different scenes depending on how they're feeling. And so what I've found is that actually having a variety of scenes actually makes the game more enjoyable. The thought was, so we just do Gen 1, and then and that was done really early in game development. And then excuse me, then as we got closer to launch, we realized that we needed more NFTs in the game. So we minted Gen 2. So now we're going to probably have more people play the game, do a bit of marketing, and then eventually we'll have Gen 3 and 4. And the idea is that there will, because say the mythical Gen 1s, there are only 10 of them, when you've got, say, thousands of game players, it'll make them super rare. And so anyway, that's the theory. We'll see. So how we use the blockchain is knowing who owns what scene. Um, we have a check-in each day that you're of gameplay, and that is to update DApp Radar stats and also to accumulate towards that 30 days of claim. And then when you do claim, that's another blockchain transaction. And publishing the best score each day is another blockchain transaction. We chose to use Passport as the identity provider. And this is good because then we don't have to worry about any PII. And we give the game players the option to skip, but then they can sign in when they need to do a blockchain thing. And so Passport does allow us to get the email address, which we could use for marketing, but we don't gather it. And I think we really need to have some sort of little tick box somewhere saying, hey, are you happy for us to use your email address to market to you? So we don't do that, so we don't gather the email address. So we needed to comply with some UK law, the new crypto asset rules to drive growth and protect consumers, to have an investor warning. And so it's funny that even though we've just got NFTs, which are, and surely people are getting them for free, to comply with Apple's requirements and the UK law, we needed to have that little investor warning button that took people to this web page here, which then told them essentially that, watch out, you could lose all your money. We also needed to have a delete my account feature. And so if people click on delete my account, it takes them to a page that explains to them how to delete their Google account, Facebook account, Apple account, or Immutable Passport. We use Unity. So on Immutable, I think the observation's been that we've got, I think it's 80 or 90% of games are built using Unity. We use Ethereum for doing view calls on the blockchain because Unity uses C#. We use Immutable Passport's Unity SDK. and we've bought licenses for all the images from Shutterstock. Another implementation note is that, you need to manage the blockchain transactions. And so they can take about 8 seconds. And sometimes they do time out. So if the chain's really being hammered, maybe your network connection's not quite right, not quite working, then maybe the connection times out. So you need to be able to resubmit transactions. You need to handle reverts. So if the contract reverts, then a transaction's going to fail. So you need to be able to handle that. And you also need to be able to handle passport sign-in status. So we're using Auth0, and Auth0 at times can require a re-login. So the game player could, say, log me out on all these devices and all these situations. And so that means that at any time you might need to have re-log the user in, and you've got to be able to handle that. So things that we've decided to avoid, but we might add later maybe, is so we're not doing any in-app purchases at all. So on Apple and Google, if you do an in-app purchase of an NFT or anything else, you've got to give them 30%. We don't have a direct link from the game to Token Trove. Or any other secondary marketplace. And so historically, this is banned if you're an app on Apple or Google. However, a large game studio has won a big court victory in the USA. So now if your app's when it's in the USA, you can have a link. And exactly how that works, if you've got an app that's global, I don't know. Do you have a special version for the USA that links to Token Trove? I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the coming year or so. If you had an in-app secondary marketplace, then Apple or Google would want to take 30%. And so, I don't think that works really, because that means that someone would be trying to sell something to another game player, and you're going to want to take some cut for your royalty, and then Apple are going to take 30%, which seems like a lot. We also don't have any in-game currency, any ERC20 either. I'd really encourage you to download and play the game. It's a great game. It's something that you can play every day, and it's really good. So in summary, I think rather than being obsessed with creating a Web3 game, be obsessed with creating a good game, a great game. You don't get overly obsessed with Web3 game. Think about, I'm creating a game. Web3 gaming brings great opportunities. So, you've got game players, they're getting ownership of their assets. Studios, they've got this resale value that may lead some players to more heavily invest. And, you've got these royalties. But it brings complexities. You've got to interact with this blockchain. You've got this crypto wallet to worry about. And, you've got to think about how to handle play to win or pay to win. So, it's complicated to make this work. The merch store for the meetup is still open, and we have got a stack of talks coming up. In fact, the next one is on at 9 o'clock next week, next Wednesday, and it's on subgraphs and data pipelines. Then a week after that, I'm doing that NFT claim contract and talking about how I've got to do random on-chain and it's secure. And then we've got like a whole stack of talks, as you can see. And if you're here watching this live, there's the YouTube channel. If you are on YouTube and you want to ask tricky questions live, please register and come along to the meetup. And with that, I will stop sharing and say. So, are there any questions?
Solid.
Solid. Yeah, we've rock.
Someone's going to ask a really complicated question in the YouTube comments.
I think so. Michael, how are you, and what complicated questions do you have for us?
I'm fine, and I'm all good for the moment. My brain is full.
There you go. All right. Look, thank you everyone for coming along today. Have a great week and talk to you all later. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.